All right. I'm gonna show you guys how to make a little cat. That can, well, not doesn't have to be a cat. It can be whatever you want, but you can put it on your left hand, your right hand. You can put it on your head, and then you can drop it in the world. Kind of just gonna go over how I would design something like this, and we're gonna add some little quirks here and there to make it unique. Um, so to start off, this layout, default Unity layout, it's garbage. At least in my opinion, I think it really kind of cucks your ability to be productive, honestly. So to fix this, I like to put all of my hierarchy stuff on the right side of my screen and then leave the left side for my scene view. So we're also, I think this is one of the most important steps here is I'm going to take this project folder, I'm going to drag it here, and then you can see it's small and you can't even read it, and that's okay. We're going to hit this little three dots here and do one column layout. The one column layout just allows you to see so much more of your project at once, and it lets you jump between folders like really quickly and drag things around really quickly. You don't have to constantly go in and find, you know, the right folder in the right position. It's super annoying to do it with the two column layout. But anyway, I have this here, and then we need to add an animation window. So hit add tab down here and animation. So we'll have this little animation window, and then we need to go to a window, animation, animator. That'll add an animator tab. And then we take this game view and you move it down here and you just make it really small. The reason I do this is because whenever I hit play, it's going to jump to game view, and I don't want to have to see it jumping to game view all the time. So just putting it in the corner out of the way. Anyway, so I made a new folder called tutorial, and I'm going to create a folder for animations. And then I'm going to find my little cat mesh. So let me go in and find that. So we'll duplicate that mesh, and I'll put it in the tutorial folder. So now we have our little cat mesh. I'll drag it into the scene. You can see it's huge and it doesn't have a texture. It's fine. Hit R to scale it, and I'll just scale it down. Keep scaling it down, and I'm gonna just line it with how big I want it to start. We're gonna be able to change the scale of it as well later. So I kind of like this as default. Seems about accurate for that. So we'll keep that scale there. And then I'm going to go ahead and reset the position of this. And I'm going to create a prefab out of it by clicking on it and dragging it to tutorial. And I'm going to call it original prefab. We're going to call it cat. I'm going to create a folder for FBX and drag the old FBX into there. So now we have our cat and we have our avatar. So first thing to do is to set up the world constraint. So VR Labs has a world constraint package, but I'm going to go ahead and just create one because you don't really necessarily need to import their package for it to work. But just so you guys can know how it works, I'm going to call this world anchor. I'm going to 0 this, so reset. So I just created an empty game object. And I'm just going to drag this into my tutorial folder. And I'm going to delete that from the main view here, from the main hierarchy. I'm going to create an empty. I'm going to call this world constraint. We're going to add a parent constraint to this. So add component parent constraint, hit add to the sources, drop the world anchor in there, and 0 it. So now we have it zeroed, and then I'm going to drag the cat plushie underneath here. And I'm going to create actually another container here and drag the cat plushie underneath that. And then I'm going to make sure world constraint, container, and then cat plushie. I'm going to go ahead and actually 0 this out. There we go. So they all should be at 0, 0, 0. So now with the world anchor enabled, if I drag this underneath the avatar here and I move the avatar, you'll see it'll stay there. Right? So that's all there is to it. It's the world constraint is just a constraint targeting an object that doesn't exist. Granted, I will say again, I did not make this up. This was created by VR Labs. I just didn't want to import the package, so I made my own. But anyway, that's how you get an object to stay still in the world regardless of where your avatar is, right? And now we kind of want to be able to move this cat around to different places on the avatar. So to do that, I'm going to create 3 empty game objects. I'm going to call this position 1, call this position 2, and position 3. I'm hitting F2 to rename things. I'm going to click on all of those and then reset the transforms again so they're all in the center here. And I'm going to go to container, and I'm going to add a component parent constraint. If you don't know how parent constraints work, unlucky. That's something you can take a look at. Probably look at documentation for it, but it basically just makes an object, basically makes an object act as a child of each of these sources with a percentage of weight. So anyway, we're going to hit activate here after we dragged in 1, 2, and 3 positions. And I'm going to take position 1, and I'm going to go into orthographic, or rather isometric front view. I'm going to take this position, and I'm going to drag it onto my wrist. And then I'm going to move up a little bit, and I'm going to hit E. I'm going to rotate it. I'm going to go back to front view, hit E to rotate it again, just to get it on the back of my wrist here. Actually move it up to be on my arm instead, right above my wrist. Cool. That looks good to me. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to click this little 3 buttons here and hit copy component. I'm going to hit position 2, and I'm going to paste component values. And then just to check, or rather I need to go to X position and hit negative. That's going to flip it around. We're going to have to change the rotation as well. And now just to test the other position 2, now we have it there. So I just changed the weight of position 2 to 1 and the rest to 0. And now position 2 is obviously off in rotation. So we'll need to rotate it that way and rotate it 180 degrees that way. So now it looks like it's in the right position. And then for position 3, we have a little bit of an interesting issue with position 3 because we're putting it on our head. And that's something that I will go over at a later point, but for right now, we're not going to worry about it. I'm going to take position 3, move it up to the top of my head, rotate it down a little bit. And that looks good. So we have the cat in all 3 positions now. And now what we need to do is we need to make sure these are children of the places that we want it to attach to. So position 1 is going to be on our right forearm. So that means we need to drag it to right shoulder, right arm, right elbow. So right before the wrist. And then position 2 is the other one. So left shoulder, left arm, left elbow into here. And then position 3 is on our head. So we'll put this onto our head here. So here's the interesting thing, and this is why I say it's a little bit confusing putting things on your head in VRChat. And I think this is a really good thing to take away from this as well. Whenever you get into game, whenever you load your avatar, for you locally, everything underneath your head is going to be scaled to 0. So everything that's underneath your head basically is going to go straight to the root of it. So basically, if I had my cat up here on my head bone, and whenever I load in, the game's going to do 0, 0, 0 for everything attached to the head, which is going to make the cat go back to this point here. They do this that way your head mesh doesn't get in the way of your viewport or your viewpoint. So anyway, we can undo all that. So to fix this, it's pretty simple. You just right click on the neck, create an empty, and we're going to call this dummy. Yeah, I'll call it dummy head. And then make sure this is zeroed. It needs to be zeroed on your neck. This transform, all of this needs to be 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, and then whatever scale. Scale doesn't really matter. But it's very important that all this is zeroed. And then I'm going to add a rotation constraint, add a source, and attach the head to it and hit 0. So what this is doing is we're basically putting our position underneath this dummy head, right? And whenever we rotate our head in game, this dummy head is going to pick up that rotation because it's a rotation constraint. It's going to copy that rotation exactly. And then the position of the cat is going to be underneath that. So if I were to put this position 3 just underneath the neck without being underneath that rotation constraint, and I rotate my head, you see it's going to stay there. Now, if I put the position underneath the dummy head that has the rotation constraint, and then I move the head, you can see it moves perfectly. And the reason I said that this dummy head needs to be exactly zeroed on your neck is because if I move it up just a little bit, let me move this out. If I move this dummy head up just a little bit here, and then rotate my head, the rotation is going to be off in game. I guess, yeah, you can't really see it off here. Oops. But in game, because everything will be scaled to 0, the rotation is going to be completely off. So this needs to remain reset at 0 on the neck. Anyway, so that's the positions kind of set up there. So just to make sure it works, we can click on the container and then do 1 here, 1 here. So that's the right arm, then the left arm, and the head. So that is the physical setup of this system done, really. Now it's just on to animations and getting this to transfer smoothly. So to do that, I'm going to create a new animator controller. Whenever I create a system, I never create it on my effects layer. I always create a new controller and then make the system off of that. So that way I don't have any issues down the line. And whenever I'm done, I can just merge the new system in the new animator controller with the avatar's effects layer. So anyway, we're gonna call this call it the cat system. Why not? And then we'll open up that animator tab that we had before, and we're gonna add a couple parameters here. Actually, we're gonna add an integer, make it easier. We're gonna do, we'll call it position. Now, just to keep it straight, position 0 is going to be disabled. Position 1 is going to be the right arm. Position 2 is going to be the left arm. Position 3 is going to be the head. And then position 4 is going to be the world constraint. Right? So just to keep this straight, this is just for sake of my brain remembering things. So we can kind of start animating here because now we know kind of what each of these variables are going to do. So we can create an animation. I guess actually an easier way to do it would just be to go into play mode, drag the cat system onto the avatar here, and then create an animation. We're going to create it under wrong folder. Create it under tutorial animations, and we're going to call it disable. So we're running right defaults off here, just to make everything a lot easier to manage. So to disable this cat, what we're going to do is we are just going to go to container and disable the container. We're going to hit record first and disable the container. And we're going to move over 1 keyframe. So this number should say 1, and then we're going to enable the container. So we're actually going to rename this animation as well to disable enable, because you can do both at the same time. And then we're going to turn off loop time. Turning off loop time is important. You know what, actually I'll leave it on just to show you why that's important. And then we're going to create 4 more animations. So I'm just going to hit Control D once. We're going to call this position, we'll call this right arm. So then for here, for right arm, we're going to set container enabled is true. And then we'll need to drag this animation into here. And then we go to this little drop down here, hit right arm, hit record, and we have the container enabled. And then we're going to set these weights all to 0, make sure they're all recorded here as 0, and then right arm is going to be position 1, right? And I'm going to copy both frames here and make sure both frames are the exact same. And then I'm going to hit the drop down and do create a new clip. We're going to call this left arm. I'm going to paste in what I just had and then change the second parent constraint to 1 here and make sure both frames are the same. So copy paste. And we're going to call this head. I misspelled it. And then we're just going to set the third one to enabled here. And then we're going to create another animation called world. And then world constraints, for whatever reason, you can't or rather constraints in general, you can't animate the isActive trait. I don't know why, or property. So to do that, we're just going to add property. We're going to go to, it's off the screen here. So let me just get this up so you can actually see it. Add property, world constraint, parent constraint, active. We're going to hit the plus next to active. Drag this back down here. And we're just going to disable, actually, we don't actually need to animate that at all. That's the wrong animation I need to add. So add property, and I need to actually animate the container's parent constraint, not the world constraint's parent constraint. My UI is doing great things right now. So add property, world constraint, container, and then the container's parent constraint, and then active. I'm going to set that to false. And then make sure both frames are the same here, so they're both false here. And I'm actually going to take this frame and copy it. And then I'm going to paste it into head, except I'm going to change the keyframe's value to 1 because we want this to be active when we're on our head, left arm, and right arm. So because I'm lazy and I don't want to have to paste this in and animate it everywhere, I'm just going to click on this first keyframe next to parent constraint active for container. I'm going to hold control and then click on the next one. I'm going to hit control C. I'm going to go to left arm, just hit paste, go to right arm, hit paste. So that way it's just pasted the weight of 1 to all of these here. Right? So now I'm going to actually do the same here with the container. The container should be enabled here in their world. So now that we have those animations set up, we can go ahead and apply them to the logic. So basically what we want to do is we want to spawn in with the cat disabled. Let me exit out of play mode. So what we want to do is we want to spawn in with this cat completely disabled. And then we want to enable it when we change the position. So basically our disable enable animation here has, there we go. Our disable enable animation should be the entry state because we want it to be disabled. And then if we go ahead and look at our animation here, we can see that disabled, the container is disabled on the first frame and it's enabled on the second frame. That means if we want it to be disabled, we need to somehow force the animation to stay on the first frame and not go to the second frame at all. You can't do that unless you have normalized time, which isn't something we're going to go into at this point, but we will go into it later. So a good way to do this is to turn off loop time on the animation. So that way the animation is only going to play once. It's not going to continuously cycle. So if we turn that off, we can actually go into this state here and reverse the speed. So you can type in -1 for speed. That's going to play the animation backwards, which is going to effectively put it on this first frame continuously, right? So that's how you do that. And then from here, we are going to make use of any state here to make this a little bit easier for us to start. So we'll put right arm, left arm, head, and then world, all in a line like this. Then you right click and make transition to disable enable, and you do the same for all of these. So you have the transition for each one. And now we're just going to copy pretty much exactly what we said here. So for enable disable, the disable enable rather, it's going to be, we need to make sure the exit time is off, transition duration is 0, and can transition to self, or CTTS, which is what I'm going to be calling it from now on. CTTS should be off. I'm going to add a condition here. I'm going to do position equals 0. So that's going to basically play. So position 0 is disabled, right? And now I'm going to actually right click up here and copy transition parameters. I'm going to click on the right arm and paste both. And then we said right arm was 1. So position equals 1. I'm going to do the same for left arm. Position equals 2. Do the same for the head. Position equals 3. And then the world constraint, position equals 4. So now this should do kind of exactly what we want here. And just to test it, I'm going to go into play mode. And I'm going to drag the animator over so I can see it. I'm going to drag this out of the way for now. So now I'm going to find my animator in my project folder, cat system. I'm going to drag it onto the avatar. So you can see it's disabled right now. If I were to change position to 1, it's going to be on this arm. If I do 2, it's going to be on this arm. If I do 3, it's going to be on my head. If I do 4, and I move my avatar out of the way, see, it's going to stay there. Right? Hopefully that makes sense. And then if I do 1 again, it's going to teleport right back to my arm. Right? So that's cool and all. It works. That's pretty much the system done and dusted. But that's boring. I personally find it boring when things just kind of phase into existence and phase out instantly. So we're going to add a little scaling animation to this. And we're going to make use of a state machine to clean this logic up because it might get a little bit messy with the scaling. So we're going to create one single animation for this. This is the cool part with reversing animations and things. So I'm going to go ahead and hit play here. And I'm going to drag my cat system back onto the avatar really quick and then hit the little drop down and create a new animation. And I'm going to call this one scale transition. I'm going to hit record. And then I'm going to click on, let me just hit preview here, enable the container. And then I'm going to click here. Yeah. And then I'll click on the container. And I think I can change the scale like this. Yes, I can. So we're going to do, the scale is going to start off at 0, 0, 0. And then at about, say about 20th of a second here. I guess that's the, whatever 20 frames is. So I guess 33% of a second. I don't know. Somebody's going to slap me in the comments. I don't really understand how math works, but anyway. Frame 20. How about that one? Okay. So frame 20 is going to be just a little bit bigger than what we had it by default. So default was 1. So we're going to do 1.2 to make it just a little bit bigger. And then at frame 30, we're going to set it back to 1. So we're going to get this nice little effect where he'll scale up, get bigger, and then get smaller. He actually doesn't get big enough for me. I'm going to do 1.25. Perfect. I like that. So now we can incorporate that into our animator here. So we're going to need to change up the animation logic quite a bit here to get this to work. There is a way we could make it very simple and clean using parameter drivers. I kind of want to do it that way just because pretty. but I think that's going to be a little bit too complicated for the scope of this project here, this little tutorial. So we're instead going to just remove all this logic here, and we're going to do it in a slightly more messy but functional way still. So I'm going to move these over here to make this a little bit easier to see. All right. So now I think I'm going to actually modify these animations here. So I'm going to go to this animation, and I'm actually going to delete the container is active from all of these. I'll show you why in a second. It's because we're not using right defaults. So I forgot to mention that. I don't know if I mentioned it actually, but we're not using right defaults here. We're going to select all of these. We're going to go to animator states and then uncheck right defaults. It's really, really important. This system, the way I'm going to design it right now, isn't going to work if right defaults is enabled. It's going to break, and breaking is no fun. And before I forget, scale transition, loop time should be off. Okay, so now we basically want to say, okay, when we get into the game, the cat's going to be disabled. So we're going to change this to disabled. And I just duplicated the animation by clicking on it and hitting Control D. I'm going to call this one enabled. Set the speed to 1. So now what we're going to do here, I guess, is disabled. I think for disabled, we're going to have to copy this keyframe of scale 0 to disable for the first keyframe and the second keyframe. So that way we have scale of 0 when it's disabled and enabled, because the scale is going to be modulated by this scale transition here. So basically what we want to happen is we want to make a transition from disabled to enabled. Go to the settings here, and then uncheck exit time, and then set transition duration to 0 when position is not equal to 0. So this basically says, okay, whenever position isn't 0, position 0 is disabled, we're going to go ahead and enable it, right? And then from here, we want to do a scale transition. But we only want to scale transition after the cat has been moved to one of these positions, right? If we scale him before, he's going to get bigger, and then he's going to automatically teleport, and that's not what we want to do, right? So what we're going to do here is we're going to make a transition from enabled to all of these, right? And then right arm, whatever you say here. So right arm is going to be, so again, same things. Has exit time off, transition duration 0. Actually, forgive me, we actually do need exit time here because we have to wait for this enabled animation to finish. So exit time 1 for all of these and no transition duration for any of them. And then we're going to need to set the transition here for right arm. We said position is 1. So position equals 1. And I'm going to copy transition parameters, and I'm going to paste it again. Equals 2, equals 3, equals 4. Okay. So now what's going to happen here is we are going to run the scale transition. So basically what's happening here is it's spawning in disabled. Whenever we enable it, the game object is going to be enabled here. And then the game object is going to move to either one of these positions based on the one we set. And then it's going to scale up. So we need to make a transition to scale transition. And then we're going to set exit time to 1, transition duration to 0. And we don't need a condition at all. So we just paste this with 1 exit time and then no transition duration here. So with right defaults off, this will essentially work. The only issue is that we aren't sending it back to the left arm, right arm, or whatever. So to do that, it's very simple. We're going to duplicate the scale transition, and we're going to call this scale out. And I'm actually going to rename this one to scale in. And what we're going to do here is we're going to make a transition from scale in to scale out. And we're going to say, going to set exit time to 1. And then we're going to say position equals 0. And then we're going to make a transition from scale out to exit with 1 exit time and no transition duration. So we need to make sure for scale transition here that speed is -1. And this should work. So basically what we've done here is we spawn in and it's disabled. And then we enable it. And then we send it to one of these positions. And then it scales in and it'll stay there. And then whenever we basically change it, so change it from whatever the current position is, it's going to scale out. However, I just realized scale in to scale out is only going to happen when position is 0. So we want to actually change this up. I definitely made a mistake here. And the astute among you probably realized that a little bit earlier. But basically what I need to do is actually I need to duplicate this scale in 4 times. And I need to delete these transitions here. So we'll call this scale in 1, copy this, scale in 2, scale in 3, scale in 4. The reason that we have to do this is due to the way that this logic chain is going to end up working here. So I need to click on this scale 1, copy it, paste it into here, and do the same for all of these. And then I need to make a transition from scale 4 to scale out, and then scale 3, 2, and 1. And we're going to set the same thing. So exit time has exit time is 1, and then no transition duration. And we're going to do position not equals 1. I'm going to copy this, and we're going to paste it, not equals 2, not equals 3, not equals 4. And then we're going to make a transition to exit with exit time of 1 and no transition duration. So basically what this is doing here is you're spawning in and disabling it, right? And then whenever you've enabled it, so whenever position is either 1, 2, 3, or 4, it's going to be enabled, but it's still going to be shrunk to 0, right? And then while it's shrunk to 0, we want to move it to right, left arm, head, and world. So we basically, after enabled, we've checked to see if it's 1, 2, 3, or 4, which is the same as here. And then if it's 1, it's going to be right arm. If it's 2, it's left arm. 3 is head. 4 is world. So after it's world, it's going, once it's done moving to the world space, after, I guess I should say, after this animation finishes playing, we're going to scale it up such that, well, it spawns in. And same for all of these, right? And then basically from there, we're going to scale it out when the position is not on the right arm anymore. So say we spawn in, enable it, and then our position is 1. It's going to send to our right arm, and then it's going to scale in, and it's going to wait here. And then whenever position isn't equal 1, i.e. whenever position isn't equal our right arm, it's going to scale out and then go to exit. And what exit state does is it sends it back to entry. So it's going to be disabled again, right? And this is like pretty much all of our logic here. In theory, it works. I'm not very good, so sometimes things happen and I completely overlook something. And if someone in here is smart, they're going to be like, haha, you're stupid, you forgot something. There's a good chance I did, but we're going to try it. So set position to 1. And see, we already have an issue. What might that issue be? Is it not enabling? Set offset to 1. Let's try that. There we go. So the issue there was that I wasn't letting the animation, rather I was playing the first keyframe of the animation for enabled, and then it was leaving. So that was basically just leaving it disabled because the first keyframe of disabled is disabled. So I had to offset it by 1 in order to get it to enable, and all that is transition offset. And what transition offset is it's a percentage, basically. You can think of it as a percentage of the next animation that should be skipped when you transition to it. So basically we're skipping 100% of the frames and we're just going straight to the end for this enabled state. So then you can see if I do position 1, it's going to enable here. Position 2, it's going to shrink and then come back here. Position 3, it's going to go to our head. And then if I do position 4, it's going to jump to the world, and then I should be able to move around. Yep. And now if I do position 1, it's going to shrink and it's going to go back. Now you saw something that wasn't really great. I don't know if you saw it, but I definitely did. Say I put it on my arm here and then I want to go to world. It's going to shrink out and then come back. That's super stupid. It just needs to stop. It needs to stop where it is instead of shrinking and growing whenever I send it to world space. Because I want it to be like instantaneous, right? So basically, to do that, we are going to have to change up our logic somewhat. We're going to have to add a transition from each of these to world, which is going to get quite messy. So to fix that, we are going to have to, I'm going to delete, no, I'll keep them. I want to delete them so I can see, but whatever. Call this sent to world, right? So then from here, we're going to make a transition from these. So from scale in to sent to world. And then I'm going to copy the settings here. So position equals 4. Right? So now what's going to happen whenever you send it to world is it's not going to go here. It's going to jump to here. And just to make sure, we need to add conditions here from scale 1 to scale out and 2, 3, and 4 that are going to check to make sure it's not world. Because if it's world, we want it to jump to this one. We don't want it to scale out. So basically, we're going to have to go here, add a condition, do position not equals 4, right? We need to add this not equals 4 so that way it doesn't jump to the world constraint here. And I'm just going to add that to all of these. Positions not equals 4. Position not equal 4. There we go. So now that we have it sent to world without it scaling out, we want to do is we want to create a transition to right arm, to left arm, and to head. And we're going to call this, we're going to actually click here, position equals 3. We're going to copy this directly. We're going to paste it here. Click on the second transition, paste it here. Click on the first transition, I'm going to paste it here. And then we also want to make a transition to scale out, paste, and then say position equals 0, because we still want to be able to scale it out when it's in world space. So this is kind of messy, but this is brute force for now. And then this should work just fine. Actually, it won't, because we're going to see it scale in. I'll show you what I mean. This is where a state machine might come in handy to clean this up. So we'll drag this here. And now say I want to put it on my right arm, so that works fine. Now if I drop it, it's here, and that's great. It's going to be stationary. And then if I want to move it back to my arm, you see it did that whole teleporting, scaling, super ugly thing. That's not what we want to do at all. We want to actually have it scale out and come back. So you know what? We actually might just be able to delete that entirely. Maybe. Position not equal 4. This should be position not equal 4. So we'll do position 1, position 2, position 3, and then 4 should send it directly to world. Then we can walk around, do position 1, scale out, and it'll scale in. Position 2, and then 4. It's going to move around. So that's working exactly like we want it to. So to kind of recap on what's going on here, let me just put these in a place that's not completely hideous. So basically what's happening here is that we're disabling it, and then whenever the position is not equal to 0, right, whenever it's 1, 2, 3, or 4, which is what we want, it's going to enable itself, but it's still going to keep that scale of 0. And then what's happening is if the position is 1, it's going to move to our right arm while still staying at scale 0. And then it's going to play our scaling animation. So it's going to get bigger and then smaller. And then once that scaling animation is done, it's free to either scale out so that way it can go to the next state, or just go to world space. That's literally how the system works. And if I want to change from right arm to left arm, all it's doing is once this scale in animation is done playing, and I say I move to position 2, which is left arm, it's going to transition to scale out, which is going to make it scale out. And then it's going to go right back to entry, where it's going to be disabled, and then it's going to be enabled again, and then it's going to move to left arm, because that's just how the logic is set up. So a really, really simple system. There's really not a whole lot to it, but I think I covered quite a bit here. We actually didn't need state machines. I, as usual, overcomplicated it from the jump in my head, and thought I needed to use them. Definitely don't. So again, just to prove that it works, we'll do position equals 1, and then we'll do 4 to lock it to the world. And then I do 1 again, and it'll go to my arm. 2, go to the other arm. 3, go to the head. And 4, drop into the world again. 3, go back to my head. 2 to my left arm. 1, you get the point, right? So that's how you do that. Now, in an ideal world, these scaling transitions need to be moved to your gesture layer, and that's best practice, and I recommend it. But this tutorial isn't. This tutorial doesn't cover that scope. So we're not going to cover that. But anyway, that's kind of how I go about designing a feature. Even a feature as simple as this. It doesn't take much time. If you watch these kinds of videos and you can take something from it, definitely let me know. And let me know of any other ideas that you'd like to understand how to incorporate into your own avatar. But anyway, that's it.